Christmas Eve drive. This happened over 20 years ago. I was driving back home with my girlfriend at the time. It was Christmas Eve, and my mother's family used to hold a large celebration at my aunt's house in Estocada. This was my girlfriend's first time meeting with my extended family, but she got on quite well with them. We spent the majority of the afternoon and evening talking, playing poker, and opening presents. My girlfriend had been quite inebriated by the time we had to leave. Therefore, I'd be driving us home. It was around 11 PM or so. I was driving my girlfriend's car along Highway 211. Now, this stretch of road is surrounded by farms and dense patches of forest, and parts of it are unlit. But nothing to fear. I grew up in this area, so I knew this road like the back of my hand. The both of us were just driving and talking away, just two young lovers making the most of our moment together. There is a portion on the highway that descends down an enormous hill before crossing Deep Creek. Surrounding both sides of the road are thick forests. There are no lights. The only thing we could see was the area directly in front of our headlights. I drive down the hill, cross the bridge, and uphill through more forest. It's as the highway starts to flatten out that it happens. Something sprints across the road so suddenly that I almost hit whatever it was. I slam on the brakes. I turn to my girlfriend and ask her if she saw it. She confirmed that she had, but she couldn't make out what it was. Maybe it was a coyote, as they are a fairly common sight in this area. But something felt off about it. Whatever it was that ran in front of our car disappeared into the woods next to the road. Coyotes don't usually just dart out in front of cars. Not like that anyway. So for some reason, I decided to check it out. I turned the car around and switched on the high beams to better light up the forest in which this thing had vanished in. I step out the car and walk towards the woods. I don't see anything. But now it feels like perhaps I had made a grave error. My heart is pounding and the hairs on the back of my neck are standing at full attention. But I still don't see anything unusual in the trees. Suddenly the car's horn blasts. It's not a beep 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 that you'd get if, say, your driver or passenger wanted you to hurry up and get in the car. No, this was a long blaring beep. I walked back into the car and asked my girlfriend why she leaned on the horn like that. She said nothing. Instead, she pointed to a spot about 50 feet from where I was standing. I looked over in that direction, and that's when I saw it. Surely this was the thing that ran in front of our car. It was a man. He was completely naked. His skin was covered in dirt and mud, and in one of his hands he was holding a hatchet. He looked back at us, and then he smiled and waved to us just before turning around and walking back into the forest. Needless to say, we got the hell out of there. Once we were safely driving away, my girlfriend explained what had just happened. While I was trying to look for the man in the area he initially vanished in, he circled back around and came out from another spot in the forest, beyond my car headlights. My girlfriend had seen something out of the corner of her eye, and that's when she saw him. Before she honked the horn, he was walking towards me, his hatchet raised, as if making to strike me. We called the authorities once we got safely back home, but they never found anybody. Oh, they did, and just didn't tell us. But the officer we spoke to explained his theory. The man was obviously looking to ambush unsuspecting lone travelers, for Lord only knows what reason. We all agreed that my girlfriend's quick thinking saved my life, as it let my potential killer know that I wasn't alone out there. I moved back into the area recently, so I now drive that highway often. No naked hatchet man sightings yet, but I can tell you that I am definitely extra vigilant now, especially near Deep Creek. I'm a 22-year-old male, and I live in a large city in the Midwest. Now, I drive for Lyft while putting myself through trade school. I drive for other similar companies, but that's beside the point. I have many horror stories from those as well, but I'll tell those another time. It was Christmas Eve, 2020. I was out running Lyft for a few hours before heading to my mum's with my new baby and wife. Nothing special going on for the night, just the usual. I get a ride request. It was a pickup from this kinda lower income apartment complex. No big deal. I arrive and I find my passenger. He has all his belongings, several boxes of stuff. Now, my car is a 2006 Chevy Impala, so it's not too big. We get all his stuff loaded up, barely, and are on our way. During the ride he's crying, saying his girlfriend was cheating on him and he had walked in on them earlier that night. He couldn't stay there because it was her name on the lease, so I was taking him to a hotel. Now, in my city we have a street that is well known for having vices. Hookers, drugs, gangs, weapons and shady motels. The works. We get to the motel. He asks me to wait for him to check in and get his key. No problem, man, I say. I'll confess. I break the rules a little when it comes to lift. I have a gun hidden in a concealed holster, secured to the underside of my driver's seat for protection. Reason being, driving Lyft and other contract apps, I have had knives and guns pulled on me, as well as people have tried to fight me, rob me and all kinds of other things. But, like I said, another time. The motel was on that street I mentioned before. Homeless people were everywhere. There was a dude on the far corner of the complex that still had a needle in his arm, passed out against the building. And I'm a big fan of true crime and horror narration, so I'm on edge. He gets his key. The whole motel is ground level, so to help the guy out, I drive to his door. As I mentioned before, he had a lot of stuff, so I started to help him unload his stuff. Which on my second trip getting stuff, I saw a guy come out of a room just to the south of my car, followed by two ladies. They came up. That's when I saw the guy raise a freaking shotgun up out of his long coat and storm into the room. The two ladies followed him, slamming the door behind them. Following, I heard a lot of yelling and shouting. I was just waiting for shots to ring out. Out of nowhere, my passenger came up behind me. I can take this, man. Go ahead and take off. Have a Merry Christmas. And he gave me a cash chip. I didn't even notice he took the boxes out of my hands and slid a $5 in my pocket. I was frozen. I knew what may have been going down in that room. I had to leave, or at least get to where I could get my gun. I know the guy and both ladies saw me, and I know they knew I saw the gun. I had to get out of there. You know, no witnesses. I got in my car and sped away quickly. I got a block or so away and called the cops. I give them every detail. After I got off the phone with the police, I signed out a lift. I haven't made much money, but it was done. I got a call later that night. The cops investigated. They never found the gunman or the woman. They never answered the door I saw them come out of. And the occupants of the room they went into said nothing had happened and that I was full of crap. Well, I know what I saw. So to the gunman I saw with the shotgun, who I'm sure was making a statement to someone about a debt, let's not meet again. So when I was 7, 8ish, my parents took me to a Christmas market that had tons of activities for kids. I didn't know this at the time, but my parents were fighting and thus preoccupied and just mostly left me on my own. The way it worked was you bought some vouchers at the door and could then go inside and use one voucher for one activity. There was stuff like baking cookies, painting stuff, wood burning for older kids, etc. It was pretty fantastic. Some of the stuff had queues if there was a lot of interest. Now, I had gotten about 10 vouchers. An activity is about 15 minutes, and my parents were in a cafe in the building but well out of sight. since it was an area you could only get into if you accompanied a kid or were a kid. I guess they felt safe leaving me alone. This was allowed, but not encouraged. Anyway, I was queuing for my favorite activity there, the fabric painting section, where you got a piece of linen and could draw Christmas patterns and stuff on it. It was already my third time, but whatever, right? I had to queue, and when I was about halfway to the entrance, someone grabbed my arm. I panicked immediately because my parents would never have touched me like that, and I knew nobody else there. I yelped and tried to pull away but couldn't. Turning, I saw it was an older lady, maybe 40s to 50s, not sure. See, she was well dressed. Looked pretty strict but normal. Anyway, she was pulling me out of the queue against my will. I tried to yell and ask her to let me go, but she said something like, "You always do this, come on Marie." My name is not Marie, not even close. I yelled as much, still thinking that she just confused me for someone else. I was a pretty average looking girl with a brunette ponytail. Nothing particularly special. No were my clothes. She looked down at me again, scoffed, and told me to stop throwing a tantrum and that we were going home. It was at that exact moment I realized if I didn't escape, she would take me away. So, I just basically opened my mouth and screamed at the top of my lungs. Not words, just a screech. Before that, I'd mostly asked to be released. Loud but not full on screaming. I was a polite kid. She paused mid-step because clearly I startled her, but she didn't let go yet. So I just screamed about the only thing I could really make sense of. My name is Sam. This was the first time that people actually looked at us as more than a mom, grandma and a kid in a tantrum, because I'm clearly too old to not know my name, and also visibly scared. I was still trying to pull away, but she had a grip on my forearm like a vice. I made eye contact with the first random person I saw looking over, a guy, early 30s I guess, definitely younger than her. I just pled for him to help me, and he actually came over at that point. We were in sight of the exit. She dragged me quite far, and I guess at that point she decided it was too much of a hassle and let me go. Since I'd been fighting her, I immediately slammed into the ground, which actually promoted more people to step up to me to help. I was sobbing, and as soon as I could get to my feet, ran the other way to my parents. I must have barreled into 10 plus people and kids on the way to where I knew my parents were. It was a cafe like I said, and they were in the middle. My mum had super recognizable fake red hair, so even sobbing I could see her easily. I banged into a table, knocked stuff off and just threw myself at my mother. I was in no state to explain, and she was both mad at me for making a scene and really effing worried because I was not the type to cause a disturbance, pretty much ever. I wanted to explain but couldn't. There was a bit of a commotion around, with people being nosy, but as I calmed down, I realized that the guy had begged for help but explained to my parents what had happened. I hadn't even noticed him come with me, but I kind of tuned in when he kept asking if my grandma was here or something. And if I could have known her. Obviously my mother confirmed that was not the case, and asked if what he told her was right. He confirmed that some woman was dragging me off calling me Marie. My parents, the guy, his son who was a fair few years older than me, maybe 15 or so, went with me to security where I tried and failed to describe the lady. The guy had a much better description of her, but she was obviously long gone. I think they called police, but I never spoke to any cops that I can remember. I felt really awkward and sorry that I ruined the other kid's day. So I gave him the rest of my vouchers so he could do more stuff if he wanted. He was really nice and gave me a pack of the cookies he begged to eat while the adults were talking. I don't remember any of their names or anything, but I remember how grateful I was to the kid. More so than his dad even. It just really comforted me that I had another kid around who was nice. Anyway, my parents took me home ASAP, of course, and we never went to that place again. There was a short story in the newspaper the next day about a kidnapping scare, my mother told me some years later, but it was all just speculation, and they didn't even confirm in the paper if it was an attempt or just a misunderstanding. Well, it's sure as crap wasn't a misunderstanding. They never caught the lady or did any follow-ups, as far as I am aware. I actually had bruises on my arm where she gripped me through my sweater, and I still don't like Christmas markets much. When I was around 12 years old, I was at my cousin's house for a party. It was around Christmas time. We were hanging out in their backyard and woods. Part of their backyard is wooded area, and we came to this tree that used to have a tree house in it. All that is left of that tree house is some steps leading to it, and a few platforms, which is not safe. My cousin told us this story about how the kids who had that treehouse had died when it collapsed. I personally thought this was a bunch of crap, but went with it. We eventually headed back to the house, but I decided to go back into the woods alone. As I was walking into the woods, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me, like I was safe there, safer than anywhere else. As I'm walking, I'm looking around and I see a light blue and white checkered flag up in a super thin tree that I didn't notice before. As I'm looking at this and trying to figure out how it got there, I started to hear kids' voices, laughing, talking, just having fun. I didn't think too much of it at the time, as my cousins were out in the treehouse. A new one they built, not the old rundown one. As I'm walking closer to the old treehouse, the voices seemed louder, and I looked back up at the flag. It was moving, despite there not being any wind. I shook it off as I couldn't feel the wind from down here, but up there was wind, and looked back down. That's when I saw them. 6 children with white skin, like snow white skin. They all seemed to be wearing winter gear, so dull and dirty looking. They were walking towards me, but I didn't run. I wasn't afraid for some reason. I heard a branch snap, and that's when I ran. As I went back towards my cousin's house, I was just surprised to see that they weren't outside. I found them in the living room, playing video games. When I asked them when they came in, they said, "When you were walking to the woods." Why? The kids I heard weren't them. I still don't know to this day who those kids were. They weren't other neighbor kids, as none of them lived close to my cousins. Were they a figment of my imagination? Whatever it was, it's one of the reasons I now believe. One of the scariest moments in my life came from something I cannot explain. It's something I think about every time I drive down that road, and it's something I continue trying to figure out. That day, hard to believe, but it was almost 11 years ago. Back when I was in college, I had to take a few night classes to finish my program. I was going to school for drafting, and one of the classes, covering inventor, was only offered at 5 p.m. This was a bit of a pain for me, as I lived with my parents still, and the college was located an hour away. So getting off at 3 p.m, then driving home and heading back was pointless. That's why I typically stayed and just killed time at school until it was time for my classes. Sometimes my dad, who worked down the street from the school, would wait around, and my mum would meet us for dinner. But other times it was just me killing time. Yeah, it was a pain, but you do what you have to do. One day near the end of the semester, both of my parents decided to meet up with me just as we had before. It was getting close to Christmas, and this town happened to be where our closest mall was located. So they decided to use the chance to get in some Christmas shopping. And after we finished eating, they did just that. I went to school, they went shopping, and that was that. Or at least, I thought. With the inventor class, despite it lasting a few hours, you could leave whenever you wanted. You were allowed to work ahead, and the teacher didn't care when you left as long as your assignment was done. Being someone who picked up on the program and 3D modeling quick, I was in a group of kids who were constantly 10 or so models ahead. So it didn't matter when I left usually. This being the end of the semester, however, I was out of work to do. I reached the end, so I ended up leaving class extra early. So I called my parents to let them know. They were still at the mall, so I drove over there to meet up with them. I did some shopping myself, and then we packed up the 2 cars to leave. Since they had gifts for me, my dad decided to drive 1 car, while my mom went with me in mine. Dad left first, so I didn't see what they had inside, and I took out after him. Back then, I still hated driving at night. Heck, I still do. So I followed him closely on the way back. My dad is a crazy, safe driver, so he drives slow, annoyingly slow. So it took longer following him, but it was okay. I felt safer with him in the lead. Getting close to home, we arrived at the T outside and the town I'll call RL. My dad was at the stop sign, ready to turn left, but a car was coming. So my dad, being an extra safe driver, he proceeded to peel out and cut the guy off. Now, RL isn't the safest town around, and when the guy slammed on his brakes and stopped in the road, I was scared. This is where people would get shot, and the guy stopping terrified me. I sat at the stop sign myself and had no idea what to do. Do I go? Do I wait? What is this crazy guy going to do? I sat there for a few minutes, freaked out, before my mum finally said, "Just go." So I did, and the whole time I kept my eyes on the grey car as I slowly pulled out and passed them. They are gone! My mum screaming, shocked me, and I remember saying, "What are you talking about?" As I too realized the car I was passing was not there. In fact, another car then passed through where the first car was sitting. The car was gone. Where I was looking now, the space was empty. Later, when I got home, we asked my dad about it, and he was confused. He wouldn't answer a cell phone while driving. According to him, there was never a car. He wondered why we had stopped, and said we were the only ones on the road, minus the guy he passed down the road 5 or so minutes later. So what did we see? Every time I passed that road, I looked to see if maybe something could have reflected light and made it look like a car. But there is nothing there, just a cornfield. My grandma died when I was very young. It affected me deeply because she had been watching me at the time while my mum was out. She died in front of me and I reacted as best I could being a child. I went to my aunt and uncle's house who lived just behind me. All I knew was that something was wrong with grandma because she'd fallen down the stairs. The EMTs came after they called 911, but nothing could be done. She had passed. For the longest time, I had trouble dealing with it. I spent the longest time blaming myself and hurting deeply over it. This has been the most traumatic experience in my life. Shortly after she died, we moved into the home she lived in to take care of my great-grandma. Though with time, it has healed as best it can. The one thing I do think about when I think of my grandma is Christmas. If there was ever a truer person that embodied love and the spirit of the season, it was my grandma. She would gather all my relatives, aunts, uncles, and cousins to her house for a holiday feast and gathering everyone from far and near, because my grandma was pretty much the matriarch of the family. The entire glue that was our family was held together by her hands, not to mention her food. If there's one thing she could do well, it was cook. But her expertise, I think, was baking. I have fond and vivid memories of gathering apples from the apple tree in the backyard for her, where she would bake pies, crisps, and whatever else she could do with them, though her cookies were the best. I loved my grandma's cookies, and she made the best chocolate chip in the world. I stake my life on it, and I remember her kitchen always being filled with the most wonderful smells imaginable. I recall a time during the holiday season when I was really missing her. It had been many years since she had passed, and I was trying to come to grips with her dying when I was so young. I was sitting in my bedroom thinking about it and talking to her in my head. I was feeling rather upset over it, really. I miss you, Grandma. It was the thought in my head that came, and shortly after it did, there was a loud sound in the kitchen. The sound was a clash of pots and pans, almost like someone was getting them out and tossing them on the countertops. We had cats at the time, so I assumed they were being ornery and had knocked things over. So I went into the kitchen to investigate. There was nothing, not a cupboard open, nor anything strewn about, nor was there a pot or pan out of place, and as well as nothing at all on the countertops themselves. It was confusing, to say the least. I shrugged it off as an odd occurrence and went back to my room, though it was then that the whole house filled with the most pungent and wonderful smell of someone baking. Not just the kitchen, but the entire house itself permeated with what smelled like a mix of brownies and cookies being made. My heart was strangely warmed by it. I had forgotten about being sad, though it dawned on me that it wasn't just a weird occurrence. I am convinced that it was my grandmother coming back to comfort me, to let me know she was still around and tell me she loved me in the best way she knew how. The story doesn't end on that note, however. When my mum came home from work that day, as soon as she walked through the door, she said, "It smells like someone's been baking in here. Merry Christmas, Grandma." Is a hard story to tell because it was my best and worst experience dealing with the supernatural. It's the best because it proves not all ghost stories are about vengeful spirits and the dark shadows that go bump in the night. It's the worst because, just listen for yourselves. It was a week before the first Christmas after my grandpa died, and I had stayed the night at my grandma's after we'd gone Christmas shopping the day before. My grandma was still taking it hard, and I had been trying to help cheer her up. We had just gone out to do some more shopping for gifts, boxes, and paper, the usual wrapping stuff. Then we went to McDonald's to grab some takeout for lunch. When we got back, we ate lunch and watched Christmas movies in the living room till my mum got there to pick me up. I guess all that shopping wore her out, cause halfway through the movie we were watching my grandma fall asleep. As I was sitting there, I started to think about my grandpa. We were always really close, and his passing really hit me hard, and I was trying to not show it around my grandma. I was missing him a lot, and I didn't actually want to stay over at my grandma's house as much as I used to, because being there brought up all the memories of him, and it made me miss him more. I never even went into his bedroom anymore because it was just too sad. While my grandma was sleeping, I tried to pay attention to the movie, but all I could think about was my grandpa and all the fun stuff we did for Christmas and how I just wanted to see him again. Then all of a sudden, the room started to feel cold. At first, I thought it was a draft, but then everything felt heavy and it got quite real quiet. The clock stopped ticking. There were no car noises, no nothing. It was like the whole world had just stopped. It looked as if the colour had started to fade away till everything just turned grey. Then my whole body felt like pinprickles and it felt like someone was watching me. As I looked up, I almost screamed in shock. There in the doorway that led into the hall was my grandpa. He was just standing there, smiling at me, wearing his favourite cream colour, brown pinstripe shirt sleeve button-up shirt, blue jeans, brown belt, white socks, brown loafers and brown glasses. The only thing different was a kind of glow around him. I sat there frozen for what seemed like an hour. Then I started to stand up. I don't know why, but maybe to hug him or maybe just to touch him to see if actually he was there. I don't know, but the second I got to my feet, he was gone. And the world went back to normal with all the sounds and colour back like someone had just hit the unpause button. I just stood there for a second, then realised I was crying and I went to get a tissue. An hour later, my mum came and got me. She and my grandma talked for a bit while I stayed quiet debating on whether or not to tell them what happened. I decided not to say anything to my grandma just yet. I told my mum everything on the car ride home when she noticed I was nervous about something. My mum was so shocked she had to pull the car over. She asked me like a million questions, mostly if I was positive on what I saw. And each time I told her yes, and describing the whole thing over and over again. And then I started to cry, and she hugged me to calm me down, even though she was crying too. When we calmed down, she told me it was okay, but never to tell my grandma about what I saw that day. After that, I still visited my grandma, but never by myself, and I didn't stay overnight again. The weirdest part of it all was that even though I was freaking out at what I saw, a part of me wanted to see him again. This is my first post here. This just happened about an hour ago, so my memory is fresh. First off, I am living very rural, in a small village with maybe 10 to 15 houses, but close to the highway, and also about 10 minutes away from the town. If you cross the street, it just takes you about 10 minutes walk to reach the forest. This is the first Christmas day. In the afternoon, my partner and I decided to go for a little digestive walk as we were really stuffed from all the food. It was about 5 p.m. and already dark when we left, and we had a big and bright LED flashlight with us. I also took my camera and my flash, as I love taking pictures of nature at night. We decided to walk on a little country road towards the forest and then turn right, following a small gravel cycle track close to the forest border, which connects our village and the next. In the middle part of the track, you have to walk through a small bit of forest. It's rather dark and the trees are very high and quite dense. When we entered, I saw a flashlight reflecting on something and recognized a car being parked there on the side of the track, close to the trees. This struck me as odd, as cars are not allowed to drive there and the path is very narrow and hidden. So I was a bit cautious. My partner pointed the light inside of the car and it seemed to be empty. I also noticed the windows were frozen, so it must have been parked there for a while. A bit in front of the car, I spotted a tree with an intriguing structure, and I asked my partner to point the flashlight towards it so I could focus better and take a picture with my flash. After I took a few images, my partner told me, there is someone standing behind us in the middle of the road. He is looking at us. Nobody was following us the whole time. I kept looking around and behind us occasionally, because at this time in the evening and close to the border of the forest there are boars sometimes, and it's mating season, so they are more aggressive than usual. Indeed, there was a man standing behind us, staying out of the flashlight's reach. He wasn't saying anything, just standing there and facing us. At first, I thought he might be startled, as it may seem a bit weird if someone's just taking pictures around your car. I decided to get up and confront him from a distance, explaining to him that I was just taking photos of that tree. He didn't react and still just stood there. I then went on to ask him if he needed some light, and he replied that this wasn't necessary. It was odd, but I was still calm, sure about there being a normal explanation for his behavior. Nonetheless, my partner and I decided to just get out there and follow the path leading to the next village. It was maybe 5 to 7 minutes until we reached it. I remember the letters on his license plate, not the numbers though unfortunately, and googled it, and it turned out that he was from a city about 6 hours away from our village. Mind you, the country I live in is in a very strict lockdown right now, so you are only allowed to travel if you have very urgent reasons. After we reached the first lantern of the next village, we looked back and observed the car driving a bit out of the forest, turning around and going back inside. I was able to see that he parked there again and turned the lights off. He didn't leave the forest. We then went home on a much longer way than initially intended, as I didn't want to go back there for obvious reasons. Our flashlight battery died on the way and my phone battery was low, so I didn't want to call the police back then. But I called them as soon as I arrived home and gave them all the details. Big regret that I didn't memorize the whole license plate, but it was just so surprising that I seriously didn't think about it. Also, it only occurred to me as really strange when I thought about the frozen windows and that he could impossibly have walked behind us. Plus him having no light and not responding, he did seem to be sneaking up on us when I sat down to take that photo. I think I was very lucky to have my partner, the camera, and the bright light with me. I don't want to imagine what could have happened if I was alone. So creepy guy sneaking around in the forest. Let's not meet again. Edit. When I told my housemate, she theorized that he may have been spying on the houses very close to the forest border, as you can easily look into their backyards without being seen. I had the thought of photoing the car when I entered the forest part of the path, but somehow I felt unwell about it and decided not to do it, despite it being an interesting scene. In hindsight, I believe this saved me, as he must have hidden behind the trees close to the car and forest entrance. If he was really planning a burglary, or worse, dumping a body, I think it's not unlikely he may have attacked me if he realized I had a potential photo of his car with a recognizable license plate. Update. Went back and found a tape marking on one of the trees, a very small hideout, more to store things than to sit in, as well as some cut off part of a backpack. Not sure if this was paranormal or not, but this morning my mum and I were in her car driving to work for a Christmas thing, where the locks in her car started locking and unlocking quickly and repeatedly, as though someone was playing with the locks. It could probably be explained as a car malfunction, but it's never done that before. And the creepy thing is that we were passing an area where there was a bad accident a day or two prior, and as soon as we were away from the area, the lock stopped. In the moment, we didn't know how to react, so we paused our conversation and just looked at each other like, what? Then turned the radio up and pretended like it wasn't happening. Friend left another friend's house about 4 a.m. It's dark, the street lights have just come back on. They get turned off at 1 a.m. every day, they come back on at 4 a.m. every day to save money. And it's a clear night, there are a couple of clouds in the sky, looks nice with the moon and everything. Anyways, my friend and I are walking for just about 2 minutes and we go around the corner of the road. It's a dead-end road, one way in, one way out, and it goes downhill. And in front of us, about 50 meters away, there are 5 people. 2 children, and what looks like their parents and an elderly woman. It's a bit odd. A family out at 4 a.m. stood under a streetlight. It's not impossible, but people are unpredictable. As we get closer, they look really odd. White shirts, beige trousers and dresses. Exactly the same colours. Again, not impossible, just odd. As we get closer, across the road from them now, and you can see how daunting they look. They have black rings around their eyes. They don't look healthy, sunken faces. It's quite creepy now, but even creepier when they just stare, eyes following the whole way. My friend, who is female, is clearly terrified that something isn't really sitting well with them. So we walk on a bit faster. I grab her closer to me, just in case anything happens. I'd rather she get away safe. So we carry on for literally seconds before a stone flies by and hits the pavement in front of us. It made us jump. My friend was even more scared now. I got annoyed, so turned to confront them. And they're gone. They were there mere seconds before, and now completely gone from where they were. There is nowhere to hide. No other ways out of that road. They'd have to run past us to get away. We started running down the road, away from where they were. My friend is crying. I'm getting tense. I hate darkness, and honestly, I was so scared. So I tell her to hold on to me and stay close, and we move as fast as we can further down the road. The road itself takes about 10 minutes to walk down. We are probably 6 minutes in and looking behind us constantly. We get to the end of the road, turn around again, and nothing. And the lights turn off only for about 20 seconds, and we are now submerged in darkness. We cannot see much, but we see at the end of the road a bus stop. And at that bus stop, we see 5 people. 2 children, their parents, and the elderly lady. Just standing there, staring. We have nowhere else to go now. I tried calling my friends to see if they were awake, but their phones were dead, so I couldn't contact anyone. My friend was still scared, and so was I, but I started to get angry, so I marched towards them to ask them what are they playing at. The lights turn back on, which makes me jump. I look around me, I grab my friend, and I head towards them, but they are gone. I still have their faces and clothing all imprinted in my mind. This was Christmas Day morning, so 4 a.m. Christmas Day. My friend doesn't understand what happened, and I for sure don't. We've tried to talk to friends about it, but they think the darkness tricked our minds. It's something I can't stop thinking about, and I dream about it. More nightmares, and I can barely sleep since. Any suggestions? It sounds crazy, but I don't care. This happened. The Christmas present. There's been a toy that has caught the attention of millions of people across the world. They're called Hatchimals, and are those toy eggs that you interact with until the actual toy animal pops out of the egg, and they are now almost impossible to find in stores. Flipping through Amazon only frustrates me more as I realize that the cheapest ones are going for around $180. And there's no way that my meager salesman salary would be able to cover that expense. It's just that my son really wants one, and I need to keep looking for one that I will be able to afford, no matter how long it takes. I'm about to give up for the night until I find a Craigslist ad for a Hatchimal for just $59. I look through the ad and find out that it's some good Samaritan that has bought 50 of them, knowing that they will sell out quickly, and is now selling them for the same price he got them for. Filled with joy, I text the number that was listed on the page, and with my laptop, I head to my room to show my wife the great deal I managed to find. The person does not text me until the next morning. While I'm eating breakfast, I see a text from him saying that he does intend, indeed, and has some left, and he's willing to meet me at the Red Lobster that is just down the road from me. So I text him back saying I can be there with the cash in 20 minutes. Once I'm done getting ready for work, I head out and park at the Red Lobster. And waiting for about 7 minutes, I see a man in his 40s step out of a bright yellow truck. I get out of my car to greet him and notice that he has a prosthetic right arm and his face is littered with cuts. I mind my manners and shake his left arm, thanking him for being so generous at this time of year. With minimal words, he states that I should get my money out as he pulls the box with the green Hatchimal out of his truck and extends his prosthetic arm out, signifying that he wants my money. I'm feeling just a bit confused, but I take my wallet out and give him 3 20s and told him to keep the $1 change. With a nod and a quick thank you, he gets back in his truck and drives out of the parking lot. I can't help but feel like it was some sort of scam, but I'm already running late for work, so I just head off to the store I work at. With it being holiday season, our store is bustling with business, and before I knew it, I have met the sale goals for today, and it's time to go back home. While I'm driving back home, I realize that I completely forgot to wrap the present, so I stop by the local Walmart and get a Christmas bag with some Christmas themed tissue paper. Before I put the Hatchimal into the bag, I check it over to make sure that it's real. Compared to what I have in my hand and what is on the picture on my phone, I quickly determine that it's real, and the guy was just creepy. Once I got home, I showed my wife the toy, and she insisted that we just give our son the gift now. I mean, he's 8, and all he's been talking about for the last month, so we know we would appreciate getting his toy quicker. And on Christmas, we can just give him the little gifts that we had already gotten him. When he received his toy, his face lit up, and he gave us both a hug and kisses on the cheek. Ripping open the box, he started petting the egg, and the egg was making slight interactions with him back. 5 days before Christmas was when it finally hatched, revealing a tiny purple and blue owl with a tiny horn on top of its head. He automatically started petting it and caring for it as if it were a pet, and we knew that he truly loved it. After a couple of days of him petting it and carrying it around everywhere, we heard the Hatchimal start singing happy birthday, and we knew that I was finally getting to the toddler stage of the toy. This is the stage that you will teach it how to walk, play games, and just be a bit more functionalities. That's when I started noticing that the toy has now started to follow my son everywhere he goes. Tonight, I told him we were eating dinner in the living room to watch a Christmas movie. He raced down and took a seat at the couch. When my wife and I came into the living room with our dinner, we noticed the Hatchimal was halfway up the couch. I asked my son if he brought it downstairs with him, but all he said was it followed him down. So I just grabbed the toy and placed him in the kitchen out of reach from my son and came back to the living room. Once the movie ended, I took him upstairs and brushed his teeth, then sent him to bed. It wasn't until around 1 in the morning when my wife and I decided to head to bed. As I'm passing my son's bedroom, I notice he's still up and carrying on a conversation. I open the door and peek in to see him petting his Hatchimal and talking to him in the dark. Sneaking in, I hear the Hatchimal telling my son to sneak out of his house and to go to the end of the street. That scares me, but rage fills me. It fills every part of my body as I realize that the voice is of the man that sold me the bloody toy. I'll head out the bloody door. I'll be at the end of the street. Merry Christmas, you dumb idiot. I got a gift for my mum for Christmas. Let's just say I won't look at Christmas the same way ever again. When I was 10, my mum's health wasn't that great. She suffered from an unknown illness which affected her respiratory system deeply. Ever since that, I had to live on my own. I walked to school alone, ate dinner alone, and my mum was suffering the same as me. She was also alone. Every Friday, I would come visit my mum to see how she is doing. The doctors say that her illness isn't getting any better, and she will die soon, which made me sad. But I always wanted to make my mum feel as if she had company. So until a certain holiday, I would do odd jobs and then I would count my savings in order to buy gifts for my mother. It went that way, and I got a job at the age of 16. As the months went on, my mother was fighting through her illness. Every day felt like a never-ending war to her. I couldn't help but just look at her and just pray that God would help us, but that never happened. Days later, it was Christmas Eve, and it was snowing heavily. I was reading until I realized I had forgotten to give my mother a Christmas gift. I quickly put on my coat and scarf and hurried downstairs. I was worried, begging for all the gift stores to be open. As I hurried through town, there had to be one store open. As I rushed through the closed stores, I was happy that there was one store left, but at that very moment, I tripped, and the door to the one open store closed, and the sign that said open flipped to closed. That was when my heart sank. It was about 11, just minutes. It was 12, just minutes before midnight, and I have failed to get my mother a gift for Christmas. I started to cry and whimper until I suddenly heard a spark. I turned around, and across the street I saw a shop. Its lights flickered. As I saw it, I knew how desperate I was, so I quickly rushed across the street and went inside. There was nothing there exactly, just a staircase that went down. I went down the staircase and noticed there was a large machine. In front of it said, "What does the person you want to give a gift to desire the most?" And there was a keyboard next to it. I thought hard and long until I typed, "To become better and to not be in any pain because of an illness," and then I pressed enter. It took about an entire minute, and then a large, white, fluffy, stuffed cat animal came out of the machine. I looked at it and decided this would be the perfect gift that my mum would love. The next day was Christmas morning, and I hurried to the hospital my mother was in. I surprised her with the gift I had gotten her, and her reaction was beyond happy. She looked at me and cried tears of joy that it reminded me so much of her own son, and that now she won't feel alone. That very day, we cried together. At night, I woke up at 10:45 to receive an urgent call from my mum's doctor. So I rode my bike to a hospital, but when I got in the hospital, the lights suddenly went off entirely. It surprised me. Was there a power outage? I used my phone's flashlight as the only light source as I ventured deep into the hospital. My heart was pounding because it felt like I heard footsteps, but not human, heavy and fast. That's when my fear started to unfold. There was blood on the walls and on the windows. There was also corpses of nurses and doctors. Their bodies looked like someone must have bitten into them. My worst fear came to my mind, and I rushed up the stairs to my mother's hospital room. When I opened the door, I saw a horrific sight that to this day I cannot recover from. My mother was held in the hands of a giant being. It was a stuffed cat animal that I had given to her. It slurped my mother's intestines as it let out a demonic grin and giggle. I screamed and ran. The stuffed animal cat followed me, and I ran with all the stamina I could, breathing, screaming, crying, until I finally got the hell out of there. I soon called the police as soon as I got home. I didn't bother questioning the police because they saw the horrific footage happen all on the camera. The hospital was a massacre. It even ended up being on the news. There were completely no survivors, and to this day, I couldn't help but still remember that stuffed animal cat, nor the store that I had got it from. This event was ultimately what traumatized me, and I still can't look at Christmas as a day of hope or joy anymore. Christmas shopping. It seemed like a good idea, a good plan, to go straight after work to the shops and do Christmas shopping early this time. It was already strange right when I arrived. The centre was far too empty for a normal Thursday night. The sky too didn't seem very promising. Grey clouds rolling in, the cold wind getting harsher by the minute. At the time I had bought my first item, a beautiful pair of long brown gloves for my mother. Half the shops had already been closed. Everybody seemed rushed and worried. I figured it was just the weather. I didn't know the centre was going to close early, and I certainly didn't know it would close that quickly and without warning. I was in the DIY shop when I suddenly needed the bathroom. Not something that I wanted to describe in detail here, but it was urgent. I needed quite some time, but I only really noticed how late it was when the bathroom lights turned off. No windows. The room was pitch black. Using my mobile phone as a flashlight, I found out of the store, made my way where I expected the sink to be, but washed my hands. From my estimations, it was maybe around 10 p.m, not much later. Definitely not 11. That's when I heard it for the first time. It sounded like singing. It seemed like a children's song, or maybe an old folk song that I didn't remember. When I finally managed to dry my hands, I pattered along the wall until I found the door, pulled it open, and was surprised that the rest of the building too was covered in darkness. No lights at all. No shop decorations. No Christmas lights blinking on trees. Although I was sure I had seen some earlier during my trip, not even any green or red emergency lights to lead the way out. My only guide was the singing. But I soon noticed that it wasn't singing. It was too rhythmic, too repetitive, and at the same time, I couldn't make out the words. It sounded like English, but the words didn't make sense, as if I was hearing a foreign language based on English sounds. And it wasn't just one voice. It was definitely a group, or maybe even a whole choir. All well versed in the song. The voices were always perfectly in unison. I stumbled my way through the empty shopping areas. At this point, I didn't even think of going away from the voices. They seemed like the only trustworthy thing. The only thing I could really make out. My mobile was too weak to give any serious light. I was nearly empty and kept turning the screen off every few seconds, depriving me of my only source of light. Still, I moved forward, around corners I didn't remember walking before, feeling my way around strange textures that I didn't must be Christmas decorations I hadn't noticed before. They seemed to cover all the walls, a soft, nearly fluffy texture, comfortable to the touch, but stinging whenever I moved my hand along the walls to feel my way. It must have been at least 20 minutes. 20 minutes, and I had no idea anymore where I was. I had no idea where I even could have been. The shopping centre wasn't big. All the walks had seemed fairly straight, but still, I had made so many turns. The corridors seemed tighter, and my mobile didn't seem to reveal anything but more of this strange material on the walls, glowing a dark green or brown in the dim light of the screen. The only thing that kept me from going insane was the song. Such a sweet chorus. It had hypnotic nature. And although I didn't understand the words, nor did I remember any of the melody or song, I had the distinct, barely controllable urge to sing along. I stumbled forward. The wall seemed to get closer every few steps, but I wasn't able anymore to turn around. The choir called me. I could hear the voices, how they were meant for me, how they were singing to help me find my way, to make me join them. I stopped using my mobile phone at some point. I lost track of time. I kept walking. The voices kept getting louder, and still they always seemed distant. Even the floor now seemed to be covered with a soft texture, and the walls felt even softer, even more comforting than before. It felt like they were trying to hold me, to embrace me, and make me happy. Then I tripped. At first I didn't know what it was. The choir seemed close now, very close, maybe just around the next corner. Without light, without even any sense of orientation, it was impossible to tell. I knew that my mobile was nearly empty, but one last time, I used it to shine around me, to find out what made me trip. The light covered only a small area at the time. The soft green material appeared in every direction. I scanned the floor again and again. Whatever tripped me must have rolled away. I shone the light around me, slowly covering an ever-growing circle, while I worried about how empty the battery must be. The choir sang more intense and better than before. I could feel the passion of the chant, the deep energy and desire behind it, and how strongly it was calling me. I couldn't resist. I pushed myself up on my hands, not an easy feat, on the soft material, and noticed how weak I felt. But I didn't care. They were calling me. They were chanting for me. I stumbled on, my mobile in hand. I don't remember clicking on my phone. Maybe it was an instinct or a twitch, but suddenly I saw the reflection. Something white, just on the floor to my right. The light turned off again. I moved closer, turned it on, round, maybe the size of a small melon, a ball. The chant got more intense. I felt it around me, as if I was already part of it. My heart already told me to sing, but my curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed for the object. Hard to the touch, smooth with a few dents. I moved my fingers along it as if in a trance. Then the object curved inwards. My fingers moved inside, deep inside. 2 fingers went smoothly right into the center of the object. I moved my fingers out, felt more, and there was a second hole. I turned the object and shone my mobile phone on it, a skull. My fingers right inside the eye socket. I must have screamed. I don't remember screaming, but I remember hearing a scream. Suddenly, silence. The chanting had stopped. Then hissed orders, again in a language I didn't understand, but I understood the tone. Anger. Anger at the disruption. Anger against me. I tried to scramble up, but the ground was too soft and I felt too weak. I pushed my hands and feet against the ground, but it just gave in and seemed to lock in and place me in like quicksand. I panicked. I tried to dig my fingers into the ground, to pull myself forward, but the mass didn't give in. I heard footsteps, quickly coming closer, hitting hard against solid ground. I was desperate. In the last bout of energy, I finally threw myself towards the side, rolled on my side, in the direction I thought I'd come from. The room seemed to brighten just slightly. Not enough for me to see properly, but enough for me to notice that light was coming closer. In exasperation, I pushed against the wall and floor at the same time, dug my knees deep in the soft but sharp ground, and finally I was back on my legs, running. I don't remember much of the way. I remember moments of the light coming closer while I ran against walls. Whenever the corridor made a curve, cursing under my breath. There were more hissing commands and other conversations in this weird language that sounded like my own but was simply incomprehensible. I don't remember how exactly I got out. One of the times I ran against the wall, that was something hard, resistance like a wood, but then the wall broke with a loud cracking sound. I fell on a hard floor, screaming in pain, but at the same time relieved to be on a ground I finally understood. I had curses just a few steps behind me. I jumped on my feet. Running on the hard ground was easy. It nearly seemed relaxing. At first, I didn't even notice that I could see again. I just kept running, straight until I realized that I knew where I was. I was back in the mall, right next to the DIY shop, right next to the exit. Still running, I changed directions, turned left towards the exit, only to see in the blinking Christmas lights that there was heavy metal bars behind the doors. There were steps behind me, many steps, of at least 5 or 10 people. Without any alternatives, I still ran towards it, and saw the thin window right to the left of the entrance doors. No metal bars, my only chance. Gathering all my strength, I sprinted forward, right towards the window. Not even the screams behind me could hold me back. My shoulder moved forward without me even thinking about it. I hit the hard window. Pain. The high-pitched sound of glass shattering. Screamed commands behind me, but I stumbled forward. I ran for about 2 blocks, then I jumped into someone's front yard and fell on the freezing ground behind some bushes. Panting heavily, I tried to calm my nerves, listening for steps, screams, chants, anything. But the only thing I could hear was the white noise of cars on a distant street. I must have passed out for a few moments. When I woke up, I was cold. Far too cold. People around me. Voices speaking to me. Sirens. And red and blue blinking lights hurting my eyes and ears. Sir? Are you okay? Sir? Can you hear me? I was released 2 days ago. That was nearly 2 years ago. Saturday, the 10th of December, 2011. The mall reported that there hadn't been any broken windows, nor did I appear on the security tapes. No shopkeeper remembered me. Nobody believed me. They sent me to a therapist. I still go. Once every 2 weeks to tell her about my day. She says it likely was a hallucination, maybe because of drug abuse or dehydration. But I don't believe her. I know what I saw, what I felt, and I know what I heard. Occasionally their chant still invades my dreams, but I'm okay. Life is normal now, but I know for so sure I will do my Christmas shopping late. I want to be among people. I want to squeeze through the crowds. I am scared of being alone. I am scared of the dark. I want to have light and to see people. I know that it all sounds crazy. I know that nobody believes me. Probably not even you. But I'm sure it happened. I'm sure I'm not crazy. I still have the gloves. Creepy Christmas. This is my first post and first ever day on Reddit, so please bear with me. When I saw Let's Not Meet, I knew I had to share one of my own not so pleasant stories. It was Christmas Eve and I was a freshman in high school. My family has been split up for some time, so normally we trade off Christmas Day and Christmas Eve every year. And this year, I had come home early from a grandparents' Christmas party while everyone else was at my aunt and uncle's celebrating at another party. When I was dropped off, my cousins offered to stay with me for a few hours. Yet, I declined. I thought I could watch some of my new DVDs and get some alone time in the house, which is a rarity I had noticed an unfamiliar car parked on the street, but didn't think anything of it, considering it was Christmas Eve. Probably a neighbor relative or something. After I got inside, I locked the door, grabbed snacks, and started to settle down. I hadn't been home for more than 15 minutes when there was a knock at the door. I unlocked the door and opened it only a crack to see a man standing there. Dark hair, glasses, slightly overweight, and dressed casually. He didn't look like much of a threat, but my stomach dropped. He asked, "I was wondering about the car outside. Is it for sale?" I told him I didn't think so. "Is there someone here I can talk to about it?" I said, and quite stupidly, I might add. "No, you can come back another time." I shut the door and turned the lock as fast as I possibly could. He reached for the handle immediately and started pounding on the door. I heard a string of profanities and the pounding stopped. Terrified, I was crawling on the floor to the phone, hoping he wouldn't be able to see me through one of the windows. Then I heard the noises. Our house had an open garage door, and I led through to the laundry room where the door lock was broken and no one had bothered to fix it. Just then I heard a man yell, and I saw the man through the window run to his car and drive off. My uncle had gotten him just in time and scared the man off. Who knows what would have happened if he hadn't made it home in time. Sadly, we didn't get the plate number and nothing ever came of it. But I'll never be home alone on a holiday again. My house was broken into on Christmas Eve. Home alone. This happened in 2019. I was in my second year of college and living in a town home about a 10-minute walk from campus. I lived with two other girls at the time, but they were all back at their parents' house for the holiday. I work in healthcare and was working Christmas this year. A little bit of backstory. There used to be 4 of us living there, but one girl had moved out due to issues with her boyfriend. He was a jackass who abused our kindness on allowing him to stay there. Was only supposed to come every so often, but basically ended up living there. We told her she needed to kick him out after an incident with him one night after he got physical with her and verbally abusive with the rest of us. She wouldn't listen, and we told her we would have to talk to the landlord then. Long story short, she ended up moving out and left on bad terms with us. On another side, not here, I have been in a physically, mentally abusive relationship before, so I understand how things may have been going for her. I tried my best for 2 years at that point to help open her eyes to the abuse and get her away from him. At this point, it was affecting everyone, and we didn't feel safe with him there, etc. So she moved out. Okay, back to the story. It was Christmas Eve and I worked the next day, so I was getting ready for bed. Locked the doors, turned the lights off, and went downstairs where my bedroom was. I was scrolling on TikTok for about an hour. It was Christmas Day at this point, when I heard what sounded like the chairs in the kitchen move. The kitchen is right above my bedroom. I thought maybe I was hearing the neighbors next door, as we share the same walls, and sometimes they can be loud. But I remembered one of them texting me and asking me to bring in a package they were expecting while they were all gone at home. The noise was short-lived, and so I just brushed it off. Next thing I know, my bedroom door is being opened slowly. In this moment, I get a flashback and remember my second grade teacher telling us about the time someone broke into her house and she acted as if she were asleep. So if they were just there to rob her, they wouldn't feel the need to hurt her if she saw them. But my freaking phone screen is lighting up my scared jaw dropped face. So I can't act like I'm asleep. Where I'm laying in bed faces directly to the door, so we're just looking right at each other. So there I was, laying in my bed, shitting myself, while this guy has one foot in my bedroom with the door cracked open. It felt like an eternity, but in reality was probably more like 10 seconds of us looking at one another. He slowly takes his foot out and closes my door. I sit there just in complete utter shock. I couldn't make out what he looked like as my eyes were adjusting to the dark again from the phone screen. All I could see was a backwards baseball cap. I knew I had to call the police, but my anxious ass knew if I called it would alert my parents' phones that I called. Me being dumb as hell was like, well, I don't want to make them worry. Also, I was scared he might still be somewhere in the house, and I didn't know what he would do if he heard me call. So I text the guy I was seeing at the time and tell him, some random guy just broke into my house and came into my room. He snapped me out of it and told me to call the police, and so I did. The dispatcher asked me if I felt comfortable to go unlock the front door for them, so they didn't have to break it down. And I told him, no way, I don't care if the door is broken. I'm not going up there alone. A couple minutes later, I see flashlights shining through my window. I hear the police knocking at the door and announcing themselves. They got in and asked me where I was. I came out of my room and they came and got me. They told me to wait on the back porch while two of them searched the house and one stayed with me. It was like that shiz you see in the movies where they have their guns and turn the corner with their partner and everything. They didn't find anyone, and I said nothing looked like it had been taken. They even tried to get fingerprints but were unsuccessful. They then started asking me questions and informed me that the back door was unlocked and had no signs it had been broken. I told them I locked it. Luckily, the guy I was talking to stayed with me the night, but I still couldn't sleep. I kept having to go check every inch of the house over and over. I placed chairs under the door handles on the front door, back door, and my bedroom. The next day, I informed our landlord and she refused to come out and change the locks, and she never ended up changing them for the rest of the time we lived there. Every time I go to bed now, I triple check all the doors have been locked. Doesn't matter where I am. I have a dog now, and he helps my anxiety of intruders, as well as a recent purchase of a Ring doorbell. I believe it was our old roommate's boyfriend. I think they may have made an extra key for him because he was basically living there. But I don't understand why he didn't do anything to me, the house or our belongings. If it were someone random, I don't know why they wouldn't have done what they intended, and that could be many different possibilities. I don't know what their intentions were that night, but to the man who broke into my house on Christmas Eve, let's not meet again. One cold night. I've had some paranormal experiences in the past, but I think this one takes the cake, and personally, I've never been comfortable in the house since. Last February is when my experience took place, one of the coldest nights of the year we've yet had. If I recall, with the wind chill, it was topping off at about minus 42 Celsius. A group of friends had come over to my husband's family's old rustic cabin to have drinks and just catch up. The night was going very well. A wood stove warmed the room, and the all-light fixtures placed the room in a cozy light. My husband's family has never been the type to speak vulgarly, and that includes swearing, which his friends are notorious for. Sometime into the night, everything is in full swing, and a few of the guys are playing cards on the small wooden table in the corner of the room. Matt, my husband, walks over to the table and asks his buddy Scott where he got the cards, as he knew cards were not allowed in any of his homes due to some weird stories he was told as a kid regarding spooky things happening, and I guess you could call it superstition. Scott replied that he had found them in the drawer of the china cabinet, and they looked pretty old. That comment didn't really sit right with Matt, and he asked that they maybe play a different game. The guys scoffed and began their playful cursing and poking fun at Matt for being a wuss. No sooner had the bantering started, but we all heard a loud banging on the front door of the cabin. Thinking it was a couple we were waiting on, we opened the door cheerfully, only to be greeted by a tall, somber man who was pale as the snow at his feet, and gaunt, scary looking. He wore a long type of overcoat, and looking past him was travelling by horse-drawn sleigh, which where we are from is slightly unusual for a normal mode of transportation. Not unheard of, but you get the point. At this point, Scott is very drunk and yells to the man at the door, "What the bloody heck do you want, skeleton?" To uproarious laughter from the others. The tall man looks around the door and stares at Scott with dark, hollow eyes and says, "I've come for Scott, last name." This is not one of us stated Scott's last name around this man, or at all that night. The room turns silent and Scott stumbles up to the gentleman, who now seems to be getting angry at having his time wasted. Scott gets up in his face and tells him that he had better leave, as there was no way he was going with him. The man tips his hat and leaves, sending the horses on their way through the frigid evening. The weird thing was, looking out the window, the man left no footprints, and the sleigh seemed light as air. Small talk occurs about the previous moment's events, and people decide that maybe it's time to shut it down for the night, as some of the women were beginning to feel uncomfortable with the visitation of the man, and the fact that the cabin door doesn't lock. The DDs gather up those who are leaving, and we say our goodbyes. Scott stays with us for the night, and we all wind down, and eventually Matt and I get some sleep. Cue next morning. Wake up to the front door fully ajar, and Scott not to be found. No footprints indicating where he went, and his shoes were still at the door. Cops are called, and eventually Scott is found. Unfortunately, not in good shape. In the hospital, he was diagnosed with severe hypothermia, and the last thing he remembered was a man next to the couch he was sleeping on, beckoning him to walk a little further into the woods. A tall, somber-looking man. The cold. Out in rural Saskatchewan, it gets very cold. As a 16-year-old boy, I was charged with keeping the fireplace alive during those long winter months, chopping wood and tossing it onto the fire all day long. God forbid my father got home from work to find a pile of smoldering embers. It was on one such winter day that my friend and neighbor Anthony came to visit. I say neighbor, but in reality, he had to have lived something like half a mile up the road. Our house is separated by a densely wooded area. He arrived in a beat-up Ford truck that he had likely borrowed while his dad was either out or taking a nap. I could count on seeing Anthony at least once a day. He was the only kid my age who actually hung out with me. On days like these, we usually sat in the living room near the fireplace watching TV. Today, well, Anthony had other plans. "What do you say we head out into the woods tonight?" Anthony suggested, his eyes alit with the prospect. "Bloody no, dude. It's already cold as balls right now. I'll be even colder tonight. Let's just chill inside," I said, as I stared into the foreboding thicket of trees. Twilight fast approaching, the brush seemed to stretch out infinitely. Kissing the horizon, I pushed down a little slight feeling of dread. Oh, come on, Benny boy. You know you want to know. Anthony said convincingly as he produced a hip flask. Its silver plating dulled and tarnished by decades of use, another item borrowed from his father, no doubt. He swung it around, making sure I could hear the liquid contents swishing inside. It'll be fun, man. Fine, I sighed. Let's leave it an hour. Now, grab an axe and help me chop this wood. When we set out, it was already dark. I had resolved to return home before long. Anthony, however, had brought a backpack full of supplies that suggested we would be staying a while. Much to my dismay, he had brought a radio and cassette tape player with extra D batteries, some flint to start a fire. He'd even packed some hot links to cool over the fire. This was all too much for an excursion I thought would only last around 2 hours tops. Soon the thick canopy encapsulated us, and we had to turn on our flashlights. We stopped after about 15 minutes of walking and found a couple of logs placed to form a circle around a heap of ash. This is the place, Anthony announced, his excitement now palpable. All right, throw some tunes on, I said as I began gathering twigs for the fire. Anthony popped in a Kansas cassette and Carry On Wayward Son began to play. We sat around the low flame as we waited for the uppermost planks to catch fire. Anthony fished his corn-wetted flask out of his backpack and screwed off the cap. He took a generous gulp and smirked as he swallowed the liquid. Bloody yeah, he roared as he moved the flask to within my reach. I grabbed it and took a modest swing. The whiskey burned my throat on the way down. After passing the flask around a few more times, I began to feel the buzz kick in. Anthony and I talked about trucks, music, football, girls at school, regular high school kid shit. We had spent the entire contents of the flask in no time, and the general atmosphere of the hangout seemed to grow less relaxed. It was getting really cold now. I breathed out to my hands and rubbed them together, inching them as close to the fire as possibly could without searing my skin, mentally berating myself for neglecting to bring any gloves. Anthony was seemingly unbothered by the cold. He was up and about, relaying some half-true story. I was even surprised to see that he had taken off his parka and thrown it over one of the logs. I heard the leaves rustling around our heads, the nighttime wind howling, and the firewood crackling in the fire. All of these sounds coalesced in a great symphony. The woods now awake, while the world went to bed. I shuddered. I'm gonna look for more firewood. The flame is getting a little low, Anthony said. Don't worry about it, man, I said, rising from the log I was sitting on. We're out of here anyway. Plus, it's really bloody cold right now. Ben, don't be such a buzzkill. We can stay a little longer. Sober up before you stumble home and get your drunk ass caught by your folks. Anthony reasoned. No way, I said. That's it for me. You want to stay out here? Go ahead, but I'm gonna head back. I turned to leave, hoping Anthony would cease his efforts and follow me. You're always bloody like this, man. This is why people don't want to hang out with you. I don't even know why I feel sorry for you and come by every day. Anthony spat, the words piercing my eardrums. In hindsight, I should have just choked up his comments to the whiskey, but I took it personally. What made his comments hurt even more was that I believed all those things about myself as well. Piss you, I retorted like a wounded animal and walked away. By the time I arrived home, the booze had well and truly worn off, and my head was aching something awful. I sat by the fireplace, stabbing at the wood with an iron poker, watching as the embers shot up each time. After feeling sufficiently warmed, I headed for bed. I went out like a light. I was awoken by a tapping on my window. I got out of bed and pulled the curtains apart. It was all but pitch black outside, save for a glimmer of moonlight. It was then that I saw him. It was Anthony, throwing pebbles against my window. It didn't make any sense. He should have long been home in bed. What was he doing out here? I could hardly see him, but he seemed different somehow. Just something about him. He seemed off. I opened the window. "What the heck, Anthony?" I shouted at him, wondering what he was doing here at this hour. Then I noticed it. His skin was a pale blue. His face was gaunt and his hair had several bald spots as if it had fallen out in chunks. He still wasn't wearing his parka. His tattered sweater rippled in the wind, briefly revealing his abdomen. He was emaciated. His skin stretched tightly over his rib cage. The worst part was his eyes. They were stone-like, resembling those of a porcelain doll, hard and cold. I was at loss of words. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was then that the figure that resembled my friend began to speak. The fire died out. "You left me there, Ben," a hoarse voice struggled to say. "You left me there." "No, I didn't," I started to plead. You left me there, Ben." "Anthony, get out of the call and come inside," I said, hardly meaning it. I didn't want him in the house, but I was also scared. Desperate to appease him, the figure launched itself into the air, much higher than any human being could or should have been able to. It was now looking directly at me, making eye contact. It was levitating, suspended in thin air. How could this have been possible? It moved closer, towards my windowsill. Seeing it up close only accentuated its haunting features. Disgusting pus-filled boils covered its arms and face. Its teeth were speckled with green and brown bits of refuse. I instinctively slammed the window shut, backing away as the figure made its way closer to the window. I should have screamed, but my voice had escaped me. I tripped on something behind me and stumbled backwards. I saw it now, its face right up against the window. The face that had once belonged to Anthony. "You left me there, Ben." It started beating on the window with two decaying fists. I saw cracks began to form in the corner of the window. I was frantic, clambering onto my bed and under the covers, as if that would provide any protection against the being. I wrapped the comforter over my head. Finally, a scream was able to escape my lips. "Ben, wake up!" My father jerked me awake with urgency. "Anthony's dad called. He didn't come home last night." I squinted as the morning light invaded my pupils. "Anthony?" I said in a weak voice. I left him. I left him there." "Left him where?" Dad demanded. My mind recalled the haunting figure of the night, struggling to disentangle nightmare from reality. "Where did you leave Ben?" Before I could even think of what to say, I had already answered the question. I left him. I left him in the cold. Don't look outside on Christmas Eve. My hands are trembling as I write this. I'm hiding in my towel closet. I called the cops, but I don't think they'll be here in time. I mean, who takes calls on Christmas Eve seriously? They probably think I'm some teenager prank calling them since I have nothing better to do than take away time from someone's Christmas. Who would believe that I'm about to say what I'm about to say anyway? Let me back things up and set the scene for you. I live alone, 2 states away from my family. I feel terrible for not being able to visit them this year. I've been having financial struggles as of recent. Paying off student loans is no joke. This is the first time I've been able to live on my own. I'm renting a cabin in the middle of bloody nowhere in Wisconsin. All that's around is a convenience store and a bar. The place is nice and the rent is cheap. So who am I to complain? 1 bed, 1 bath, and a cramped kitchen that's right behind the living room. The living room has a nice fireplace too. It keeps the house warm through the night. So now that you've got the picture, I need to share my experience, no matter how few people see it. I didn't have big plans for the holidays. Stay at home, watch some TV, and eat a frozen pizza if I was lucky. No big fancy dinner, no visitors. Just an average night. That's just what happened. I kicked back on the couch with pizza in hand and watched Christmas movies until my eyes grew heavy. I was awakened by a knock at the door at around 11:45. It's dark and snowy out, per usual this time of year. I don't get visitors nor could I see who it was, so I looked out of the small window in the living room. Frost cloaked the glass, making it a challenge to see who was waiting for me, who was waiting for my answer. I could make out a human-like figure. My gut was telling me to stay the hell away from what was at the door before I even got a chance to move. The snow was falling so heavily that it was hard to see anything beyond 6 feet of my house. I trusted my gut, though, and moved to my room. I began to think I was a bad person for leaving whoever was out there in that icy mess. Just as the thought entered my mind, the knocking grew louder. I covered my ears in response to the noise beyond my door. I faced away and it only got worse. I was right to trust my gut. I shouldn't open the door. I can't let this go on. I exhaled deeply and threw my legs over the bed and reluctantly shuffled over to my door. I twisted the knob and peeked outside. The cold weather nipped at my face as a reply. "Hello?" I peered through the crack. "Hi," the person started. I began to make out facial characteristics and realized it was a young woman. "My car broke down and this seemed like a good place to seek shelter." This was a red flag to me. There's a convenience store and a bar within a mile of each other. Why show up at a random house for help? Now, I consider myself a nice guy, but the holidays don't make me a giving person. I don't like my sleep being interrupted either. Oh, I started. I wasn't sure how to respond. Her behavior was off, to say the least. She was glancing over her shoulder, as if she could see anything through the darkness and snow. "I can give you a number for a towing company. There should be an inn at least a few miles from here. The towing company can take you." She didn't seem satisfied. "Are you sure?" she inquired. "It's awfully cold out here, and I don't know how long it will take them to get here." She began to look more paranoid. Her eyes darted from side to side, up and down. It was really freaking me out. "Listen, hun, my house is a wreck, and it's the middle of the night. I'm sorry. I know it's the holidays, but I have a thing about letting strangers into my house." I immediately regretted saying those words. Her fear turned to anger. At this point, she became hysterical. She kicked, punched, and beat my door, trying to force herself in. Her polite words were now screams. "Let me in! Let me in!" The Jane door at my door pounded harder and harder. It seemed like my door was about to break. What the hell are you supposed to do in this situation? So in the spur of the moment, I just locked the door. The knob rattled violently, then stopped abruptly. I picked up my phone and alerted authorities, and I alerted them that there was a manic woman outside of my house. At this point, I figured she had given up and left. I sat down in front of the TV and tried to enjoy the rest of the night. I pondered why she was so upset. No family? Trauma? None of my theories added up. Just as my thinking had concluded and I began to relax, I heard a faint sound. A sound that was so quiet, but seemed so loud. It was a shuffling of snow outside of my window. I pulled my blinds back and peeked outside. The dim light from the street lamps shone onto my white lawn. The woman was making a circle in the snow. I squinted, trying not to reveal my presence. My eyes began to adjust to the darkness outside. It was now 1 a.m. There were symbols I couldn't recognize and a large pentagram in the center. When she finished her artwork, she looked right at me. She was staring into my soul. Her gaze sent chills down my spine. Her mouth open at inhumane angles. Just then, a scream was released. I fell back into the couch. What the bloody heck do I do? I called the cops for a second time. Writing this, I'll be censoring my address for my own security. Here's how that phone call went. Address. I need police. Please come quick. Sir, we already have the sheriff and backup on their way. They should be there within the hour. Lock your doors. I had a click on the other end. Well, what am I supposed to do now? I'm alone in the house, which seems much more ominous than the night before. There's some psycho lady standing in my yard in the middle of the night. To top it off, the cops that should be arresting this woman are probably out for drinks. I let out an audible sigh and sat on the floor with my back to the couch. This was not what I thought of an ideal Christmas. I figured I might as well freshen up and get ready for bed. Any silver of hope left in me was gone. I picked myself up off the floor and made my way to the bathroom. I didn't want to risk her seeing me, so I just used the dim flashlight on my phone. I brushed my teeth and rinsed my face. I thought that would make me feel better, more alert. I was wrong. Once I finished, I heard a knock at the door, followed by a scream. It was deep, unlike the shrieks previously heard from the girl. Something in me clicked. I mustered the strength to peek outside. There were blue and red lights flashing, signaling help had arrived. But something was wrong. The lights from the car further illuminated my lawn. There were 2 mangled bodies left inside of what I can only describe as the altar. Remnants of black uniforms informed me of who they were. Police. Another guttural howl was heard, this time only a few feet away from my window. I did the only thing I could think of, and that was to hide. That brings me to the now. I'm in my towel closet. There are 2 dead bodies in the snow and something outside of my house. Something not human. I don't know when she or it, or whatever the heck you want to call it, will get inside. But my gut is saying that she will, and I couldn't have picked a worse spot to hide. I feel like the idiot friend in a horror movie that gets plucked off first. Please, if you're reading this, protect yourself this holiday season. Don't let it know you're there. Don't be like me. Please, save yourself and your family. I just heard something come down the chimney. And it's not Santa. She's inside. A born white winter. When I close my eyes, I can still see our old house, sitting out on that quiet Vermont cul-de-sac. The street had only one other house, forever under construction, and the next nearest neighbor was half a mile down a dirt road, through the woods that we would wander. My younger sister, Gemma, and I came to know the woods around us as well as we knew our own home. When we stood outside, we felt well and truly alone. But no one believed the stories we told about. One Christmas break, my mum's sister and her family came over for a 3-day trip. Aunt Bob was as different from my mum as a sister could be. and we teens, well, while my sister and I were free spirits with little guidance, our cousins Jack and Ali were strictly regimented, even during winter break with the family. So when Aunt Barb had too much eggnog and knocked out in the basement, Jack and Ali were only too happy to indulge in a small act of rebellion. They dropped their books and begged us to take them exploring out in the white woods. "Come on, Gemma Brooke," Ali pleaded. "I don't want to spend my whole vacation studying. Mum will never notice, and Dad's working in the den." We didn't take much convincing. Everyone bundled up and we headed out to see our favorite winter sight, the frozen waterfall at the property line. It was just a little one, feeding them into the brook, but it was a sight you could only see in winter, the graceful movement of water, frozen in time. "That's it?" asked Jack when we finally arrived. 15 minutes of hiking in the cold just to see this? That's hardly even a waterfall." "I bet there's a bigger fall on the rock ledge over there," said Ali. Gemma and I shivered, and not from the cold. "No," said Gemma, "we don't go over there." "Well then, now's the perfect time," Ali cheered, dashing away with Jack running after her. "No, wait," I called, but they ignored me. They ran through the snow, laughing and whooping, as Gemma and I chased after them. But I'd lent Ali my snow boots. I was slipping in my sneakers with every step. By the time we could see the mouth of the cave in the rock wall, the two were breathless with excitement. "Shiz!" yelled Jack. "Take a look at that." "Get back here!" I shouted. "We don't go there," Gemma said, grabbing each by the arm. "Why?" asked Jack. "What's in there?" Gemma's eyes darted to me as I stumbled along, looking for an explanation. I pulled our cousins away from the entrance, only daring to speak when we'd retreated back to the tree line. "They call it a Wendigo," I murmured. Jack burst out laughing. "What? It's 9 feet tall with antlers? Some supernatural shiz there? Should I call Sam and Dean?" My lips trembled, and I fought a frown. "I'm not kidding, and we aren't monster hunters. That means it's actually dangerous." "Come on," said Gemma. "Let's go back to the path." Jack and Ali started to follow, but as soon as I released Jack's arm, he was running back to the cave, hooting and howling like it was some kind of game. "Jack, get the hell over here," I demanded, running after him. When he reached the mouth of the cave, though, he stopped dead in his tracks. He turned around, white as polished bone, gagging as he stumbled back to the tree line. The stench of rot and blood was heavy in the air. Though Jack didn't say a word, I understood what he was feeling. As we walked away, I swore that I heard sniffing from inside the cave. That night, the family gathered around to play board games, but Jack just sat in the corner of the room, silent as snowfall, his eyes wide. "There was blood where his lip should be, Brooke," Jack whispered when I sat beside him. I only nodded. The image of the born pale man with a bloody gash for a mouth flashed in my mind. The unhealed sores gaping on his legs, the jagged ribs that bruised his thin lips, the smell of decay. I shook it away. "You can forget about it," I told him. "Tomorrow's Christmas and then you'll be heading home." Jack just shook his head. "Forget? How can I forget the first time I saw a He shot up from his seat, green in the face, and darted to the bathroom. The next morning, I woke up early and went out to tend the chickens. As I made my way to the coop, though,
Unease washed over me. The chickens were terrified, cackling over and over, shivering in the corner of the coop. Shh, 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 I cooed, reaching down to pick up Tandoori, my favorite. But a deep pain shot up my arm. With a cry, I dropped her. Tandoori had bitten my hand and ran back to the others, huddling for safety. Rudy, the rooster, puffed up his breast feathers, stuttering between me and the hens. I spread out some feed and closed their coop tight, not even bothering with the eggs. My hand was bleeding good, throbbing and red. As I stepped outside though, I forgot about the pain entirely. The paranoia that something was wrong blared alarms in my mind. My senses were on high alert for anything out of place. That's when I noticed the footprints in the snow. Not mine. Not my family's either. Not unless they went outside barefoot. And the footsteps led straight to a broken basement window. I felt my heart drop. My blood ran cold, and then I heard a scream. I raced through the front door, my eyes darting to find anything amiss. Everything looked fine. The tree glittering with ornaments, the gifts wrapped and piled below it. But I wasn't going crazy. Gemma had sped down the stairs from her bedroom. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. "Where's Mum and Dad?" I think they're in the greenhouse," I said through a tremble. Another scream clamoured. "Brooke! Gemma!" The tone was blood-curdling, so haggard that I almost didn't recognize it as Ali. Quick footsteps pounded up the basement stairs. A desperate grasp at the doorknob rattled it, followed by a loud thud. "Please!" Ali's voice was closer this time, cracked and throaty. Gemma grabbed a fire iron and grabbed a kitchen knife as we approached the basement door. Ali still screaming. We locked eyes, counted the 3, then opened the door. There, on the other side, was Ali. Her face was dripping with blood. A red gout split her forehead. "Help me!" she screamed, gripping the handrail for her very life. "Help me!" Below her was Aunt Bob, her lips bitten and bleeding, her face crazed, her skin ashen. She gripped Ali's leg, her nails tearing into its flesh, her tongue stretched out of her jagged mouth, reaching for a taste of Ali's blood. She was stopped by Jack, who clenched his arms around Bob's waist, pulling with all his might to keep her off the stairs, desperate to help his sister. Meanwhile, Uncle Dave laid on the floor, crumpled like a doll and bleeding. Zeman and I each took one of Ali's hands and hoisted her up the final 3 steps. Bob's nails raked down her leg. As Ali escaped a grasp, Auntie Bob fell backward onto Jack, knocking them both to the ground. She jolted wildly, her elbows swinging left and right, pounding him in the face. Blood poured from his nose. I held up a finger to him. "Wait," I mouthed, and closed the door. "Get my parents from the greenhouse," I told Ali. Then I turned to Gemma. "Get the chain." Ali hobbled out the kitchen door towards the greenhouse while Gemma and I scrambled to collect anything we could use. All the wild thrashing and screeching of my aunt shot through the house, punctuated by shouts from Jack. Gemma held out the chain and I gripped a brule torch from the kitchen. We heard frantic calls from Jack downstairs. "Hurry!" Again, we counted 3 and swung open the door, but only Uncle Dave's body lay at the bottom of the stairs. We scurried down, silent as possible, checking our corners. A putrid smell assaulted our nostrils. The smell of death and corruption. Then we heard a shout. When we rounded the corner from the stairs, we saw them. And Bob biting into Jack's arm. He wrenched away, a gash forming in his arm. Jack slammed to the floor, dragging himself to us. Finally, Bob acknowledged us, her wild eyes roaring over us, estimating us with the concern of a trapped animal. I fired up the torch, and Bob flinched backward, her head spun in search of an exit. Then she fixed on the broken window. Below it lay the forsaken body of the original Wendigo, its stench filling the room. Bob rushed Gemma, pushing her to the ground, then lunged for the window. Gemma sprang up and hurled the weighted end of the chain at Aunt Bob, catching her by the leg. Bob shrieked, hoisting herself up through the window, skidding Gemma down to the ground. "I can't hold her!" Gemma yelled. I jumped to the ground beside her and grabbed onto the chain too. Even with both of us pulling with all our might, Bob still dragged us across the floor, rug burns grating our skin. But then a screech erupted, so loud and terrible that I thought my head would burst. My father from outside the window had stabbed Bob's hand with a silver-plated knife. Then my mother forced a silver pendant in Bob's mouth, holding it closed. A rush of icy air swept through the basement and out the window. Finally, Aunt Bob collapsed from exhaustion as warmth returned to her skin. The original body of the Wendigo dissolved away to ash, and we can only hope its spirit evaporated with it. Still, for good measure, we restrained Bob until an ambulance was able to come. Uncle Dave had a concussion but ultimately survived. Jack and Ali each recovered physically despite their nasty infections, albeit with scars. And Bob was held in the ICU, malnourished, dehydrated, and raging with an infection. When she recovered, she couldn't recall at all what had happened. Ali had told me though, the Wendigo, apparently having caught Jack's scent, tracked him to our basement. My guess is that it wanted a new host. The smell of decay was heavy on his whole body, and Jack was young and strong. And then, well, for all her flaws, when Aunt Bob saw that monster charge towards her son, she threw herself in the way and absorbed the Wendigo spirit in Jack's place. It might be easy to blame Jack for all of this, but I really feel for him. After all, how has he ever supposed to learn that there are consequences for his actions? If he was never allowed to choose his actions, he had been so insulated, so desperate for any amount of freedom, but he couldn't even conceive of limits to his behavior. He had no idea how dangerous freedom could be, what responsibilities came along with it. But now he's learned his lesson, and it's the kind he won't soon forget. What happened to me in the winter of 2002? This event took place in the winter of 2002. I was 9 years old. Here's a little about me. When I was a kid, I was a lively child. I didn't talk all that much, but I had maybe little too much energy. I do things without thinking and often got scolded after I accidentally broke something or hurt someone. I loved winter, so I was outside playing in the snow every day. Our front yard was filled with snowmen of different sizes and a couple of snow forts. The sun had set and it was only about 4 p.m. and it was already dark outside. I was building an extension to my fort when I heard a slight giggle coming from the forest. I stared into the dark forest for a short moment till I carried on with the building. "What an ugly looking pile," a voice emanating from the forest said. It gave me the chills. The voice was hoarse and guttural. I walked to our terrace and stared into the forest for quite some time again. Mother came outside and asked if everything was all right. I nodded to her and ran back to work on my fort. She returned indoors. "Seriously, have you done this before?" it said, being even closer now. "Who is there?" I replied this time. No answer. Another maybe 20 to 30 minutes went by and it spoke again. "You really suck at this, huh?" At this point, I felt anger and rushed towards the forest. I looked behind some trees, but I didn't see anyone. All I heard was an echoing giggle. "Shut up!" I shouted, and silence took over. "Don't go to the forest or you'll get lost." My mother broke the silence. I turned back and went on with my fort. I had lost all the motivation to build it now. I sat down and leaned on the wall of the fort. The wall collapsed and rage took over me. I destroyed the whole fort. "Sorry for earlier, it's just that it's winter and I'm quite hungry." This time the voice came from real close, behind a snow pile. "Go eat then," I huffed, and it burst into giggling again. I took a dash to look behind the pile. "What?" I shouted, but no one was there. Silence fell upon the yard again. I punched down a couple snowmen and returned to the ruins of my fort. I started building it again, and in the middle of building the voice was behind me. "Dinner time!" And immediately a cold bony hand covered my eyes as it pinned me down. I felt a sharp stab on my stomach, which made me cry in pain. My mother rushed out and screamed at first and yelled, "Get off of him! Get off! Get off now!" At this point, I had lost my consciousness. I woke up some days later in a health center. I couldn't remember what had happened, and my mother said I fell over an icicle which made a cut in my stomach. I had around 9 centimeter cut right below my ribs. I had no reason to question it, as not many children would. Within the next month, we had moved away from that house. Years later, I started having nightmares about that day. I told my mother about the reoccurring nightmare when I was 17 years old. Right after I brought it up, my mother looked upset. She told me to sit down first. "Remember how you got that scar on your stomach?" she asked. "Yeah, you told me I fell over a sharp icicle." She then told me that wasn't true. She told me that because what really happened could have scarred me for life. She felt relief that I couldn't remember that day, and she wished I never had brought it up again. The sight was too shocking even for her. This is what she told me then. I see nightmares about that day too, occasionally, mostly about what could have happened if I had not heard you scream. I ran outside and saw this skinny old human wearing nothing but leather clothing, and the stench was indescribably terrible. It was over your body with its fingers tearing into your stomach. I screamed at the sight and grabbed the first thing I could and ran towards you. I hit it with a shovel many times, but it didn't seem to budge. "Get off!" I yelled, and yelled while crying. "He's a good boy. Stop hurting him." Then it turned its head at me. Its face looked so wrinkly, bony, and its white thin hair overlapped the face. I took a final swing on the head and it scurried off four-legged. I called for help and we took you to the health center, where you stayed for over a week due to infection over the wound. I would hear it in her voice that she was not lying, but I have a hard time to believe all this. She also claimed that they found a small piece of rotten human skin inside my wound. It wasn't mine. I really don't know what to believe, as it thrives fear in my mind to even think about it. Maybe she really believes in what she remembers, Maybe my real memories of the day lay hidden in my subconsciousness, and the nightmare is just a fantasized version of them. But this day, I want to believe it was just a freak animal attack that I was lucky enough to survive.